The Dragon King burned Elianor Vey's trial dress before the court had finished deciding whether she deserved to scream. The dress was made to burn only if she lied, but court law had always preferred lies that wore official heat. That was what the court believed. Elianor knew fire silk burned for something older than lies, the first heat a command tried to hide. First heat was not innocence, it was origin. High Ember Judge Corvath Nair told the nobles gathered beneath the glass fire ceiling of the Emberglass Court that the fabric could not be deceived. He stood beside the black trial dais in robes, the color of cooled ash, one long hand resting on the silver hook used to lift condemned fabric from condemned bodies. Around him the court watched with the bright hunger of people who had been promised justice without being asked to name cruelty. Elianor stood at the center of the dais. The trial dress clung to her body like cold water. It was modest high at the throat and long to the wrists, woven from pale fire silk that shimmered blue-white beneath the court's braziers. Beautiful enough for a bride? Fine enough for a queen? Cruel enough for a servant accused of touching fire above her station? She kept her hands still at her sides. That was harder than looking brave. Her fingers were covered in small burns from years of mending scorched table linens, torn altar veils, singed royal banners, and the inner sleeves of dragon armor after battle. She had stitched firecloth since she was 11 first in the lower laundry vaults, then in the west fabric room where old smoke collected under the rafters. She knew the difference between flame that wanted to eat and flame that wanted to speak. And royal fire, when trapped in cloth, always spoke first through the seam it had been forced to cross. And Elianor knew seams remembered pressure better than courts remembered mercy. No one in Ardenthal cared what a firecloth mender knew. They cared that the royal flame had softened near her. 3 nights earlier, Dragon King Rhaevan Sol had returned from the eastern punishment fields with blood-dark ash on his gauntlets and fire still moving over his shoulders. A condemned border courier had been dragged before him, wrists tied in red cord, accused of carrying enemy names beneath his tongue. The court expected Rhaevan to burn the confession from the man's mouth. Instead, when Elianor knelt to replace the singed firecloth beneath the throne, steps a loose thread brushed the king's flame. The fire turned blue-white. It curled away from the courier's throat, and for one breath everyone heard Rhaevan's own fire whisper, "Spare him." The fire had not softened because Elianor tempted it. It had softened at the seam where the king's first mercy had been stitched over. The courier lived for 7 heartbeats, longer than the sentence allowed. By dawn, Elianor had been named Flame Tempter. By noon, Corvath had announced the trial dress. Now the High Ember Judge raised his voice, so every arch of the Emberglass Court carried it. Elianor Vey, oath-bound servant of the West Fabric Room, accused of seducing royal fire, corrupting execution flame, and luring the Dragon King's command into unlawful mercy. A murmur moved through the court. Flame Tempter. It was not the first cruel name Elianor had been given. Servants called her Ash-Fingered because scorch marks never fully left her skin. Nobles called her Fabric Rat because she knew the palace by seams, hems, vents, and laundry passages instead of halls. But Flame Tempter was worse. It made her suffering sound like invitation. It made the king's fire her crime instead of his mystery. And mysteries were easier to punish when they were dressed in servant skin. Dragon King Rhaevan Sol sat on the ember throne above her. He looked like a weapon the kingdom had learned to worship. Tall, broad, black-haired, and terribly still, he wore black dragon armor etched with red-gold fire lines. His face was sharp and beautiful in the way obsidian was beautiful before it cut. His eyes burned ember gold beneath dark brows, and every noble in the court watched him as if his silence might become execution. Elianor did not look away from him. That was her one rebellion. Corvath noticed. "Lower your eyes," he said. Elianor's throat tightened. "I did not call the fire." "No," Corvath said softly. "You invited it to forget its purpose." Rhaevan's gaze shifted. "Not much. Enough." Elianor felt it like heat across her skin. He had not defended her. He had not stopped the trial. He had allowed the dress to be laced around her body and the court to assemble beneath judgment glass. But when Corvath said forget something, moved behind the king's eyes. Pain, perhaps? Or recognition buried too deep to rise cleanly? Corvath turned to the throne. "Majesty, the dress has been woven under Ember trial law. If she speaks truth, Royal fire will pass over the cloth and leave her standing. If she lies, the fabric will take the falsehood from her flesh. The court understood what that meant. Elianor did too. Trial dresses did not merely burn. They preserved the first false heat after judgment, so punishment could be worn again by law. A liar's ash could be sewn into warning banners, temple veils, even children's lesson cloth, so future generations could touch the punishment and learn obedience through their fingertips. Elianor lifted her chin. "Ask me the question." Corvath's mouth narrowed. Rhaevan leaned forward by the smallest degree. The court quieted. Corvath said, "Did you seduce the Dragon King's fire into mercy?" Elianor's hands curled once against the dress. Every instinct told her to answer only no, but the word would be too small. "No," she said. Mercy was already in it. If there was guilt, it had been stitched over mercy before it reached her hands, not in her. In the fire before the court taught it what to become, the braziers dimmed. For one impossible second, the entire Emberglass Court seemed to inhale. Corvath's eyes sharpened with triumph. "Then let royal fire judge whether you speak truth." Rhaevan rose. No one else could have made standing feel like a blade being drawn. He descended the 3 black steps from the Ember Throne and stopped before Elianor. Up close, he seemed less like a distant weapon and more like a man who had been forged too long under orders no one else had to carry. His fire gathered slowly in his right hand, red gold at first, then darker at the core. Elianor's pulse thundered. He looked at the dress, then at her burned fingers. His voice was low enough that only she and the nearest flame could hear. "If you are lying, it will hurt." Elianor swallowed. It already has. For one breath, the mask of the Dragon King cracked. Then Corvath said, "Ignite the cloth, Majesty." Rhaevan touched 2 fingers to the trial dress. The fire recognized the mender before it recognized the judge. Because a judge could command flame, but a mender knew where it had been forced to bend. Fire rushed over her. The court rose in a single wave of expectation. Elianor braced for pain. It did not come. The flames climbed from hem to throat, blue-white and bright as winter lightning. They filled the woven silk, lifted every thread away from her skin, and burned without consuming. The trial dress did not blacken. Her body did not catch. Instead, the fabric opened like 1,000 tiny windows of fire, not memory windows. Seam witness. The dress was not showing the past. It was showing the stitch that had changed what the past was allowed to become. Inside them, Rhaevan Sol appeared younger, kneeling in a war tent before a bound border courier with wrists tied in red cord, his flame held back from the man's face. The court went silent. Rhaevan stopped breathing. Corvath's hand tightened around the silver hook. The flames around Elianor's dress whispered with the Dragon King's own overstitched voice. "Do not burn him. He carried a message, not a blade. Mercy thread retained. Execution heat overstitched. Trial flame contested." But contested was not overturned. Not yet. The fire did not finish judging Elianor. It began judging the stitch. A stitch could not beg. It could only show where pressure had been applied. The trial dress kept burning around her in blue-white waves, bright enough to make the emberglass ceiling glow like frozen lightning, but the flame still did not touch her skin. It lifted the pale fire silk away from her body, thread by thread, as if the cloth itself were trying to step between Elianor and the judgment meant to consume her. The court did not know what to do with a woman who should have been ash. A noble lord lowered his prayer beads and forgot to count them. One of the ember scribes stopped writing with his quill suspended over the record page. The guards at the foot of the dais kept their hands on their spear shafts, but their eyes stayed fixed on the blue fire moving across Elianor's sleeves. Corvath Nair was the first to recover. "Trial flame contested is not trial flame overturned," he said. And Corvath spoke as if naming the difference could keep the cloth obedient. His voice carried neatly without panic. That was how dangerous men survived the first crack in their power. They did not deny the crack, they named it smaller than it was. Elianor stood inside the burning dress, breathing carefully. The heat did not burn her, but it was not gentle. Every thread hummed against her skin, pulling at the old scars on her fingers, asking where her hands had touched, where the royal fire had bent, where the seam had been forced to carry one heat over another. The vision of the war tent still glowed in the fabric. Rhaevan Sol, younger and smoke-stained, kneeling before a bound border courier with wrists tied in red cord. Do not burn him. He carried a message, not a blade. The king above her looked as if someone had driven that sentence through his armor. But Elianor did not look to him for rescue. She looked down at the seam running from her wrist to her palm, the same seam that had flared first when his fingers touched the cloth. A mender did not ask flame to be merciful. A mender asked where the pressure had changed the pattern. That was why they feared menders more than prophets. Prophets accused. Menders proved. She pressed 2 burned fingers to the glowing line, then read the stitch over it. The fire silk tightened. Corvath's eyes cut toward her. A mercy thread has no standing once execution heat is sealed. The dress answered before the king could. Mercy thread retained. Execution heat overstitched. Judge Seal entered. Royal flame obeyed. The line did not absolve Rhaevan. It bound him to the obedience. The words did not appear as ink. They formed as burning tension, each phrase pulling through the cloth in a different heat. Mercy thread burned blue-white, thin, but living. Execution heat burned red-gold, thick and heavy, laid over the first like a second skin. Judge Seal burned black at the edges, pressed into the seam with the hard shape of authority. Royal flame obeyed. That was the line that changed Rhaevan's face. Not because it cleared him, because it did not. He stepped closer to the dais, and the blue-white flame reflected in his ember-gold eyes. My fire stopped. Corvath turned to him. Your first heat wavered. It spared him. First heat is origin, Majesty. Final heat is law. Rhaevan's jaw tightened. The court watched him carefully, now not with love, but with the fear people feel when a weapon begins examining its own edge. He looked at Elianor. The fire still stood between them. If my first fire spared him, he said, voice low, then I let another heat wear my command. Elianor heard the admission. She did not soften for it. He had allowed the trial dress. He had touched flame to her body. He had let the court dress his uncertainty in law and call her the seducer of his fire. The fact that his first mercy had once been buried did not undo the way his present hand had helped begin her burning. No one wore your command without your silence, she said. The dress burned brighter as if the seam agreed. The words struck him harder than comfort would have. Corvath moved. His silver hook flashed under the blue light as he stepped toward the dais. The accused is manipulating unstable fire silk. The dress must be lifted before distortion spreads. Rhaevan's head turned. Do not touch her. I am not touching her, Majesty. Corvath raised the hook toward the burning hem. I am removing corrupted fabric. Elianor saw the lie in the motion, not because she knew politics, because she knew cloth. A hook lifted fabric by its weight. Corvath aimed for the seam. He was not trying to remove the dress. He was trying to cut the witness. The silver tip slid toward the place where mercy thread and execution heat crossed. Before it touched, the blue-white fire recoiled, not backward, sideways. It avoided the hook like a living thing, remembering pain, then ran along the curve of silver, climbed past Corvath's glove, and leapt to the cuff of his ash-colored sleeve. For the first time, the high ember judge lost stillness. He tried to shake the flame off. It did not spread like ordinary fire. It crawled with purpose along the inner stitch of his sleeve, following a black thread hidden beneath the embroidery. The court saw it then, a tiny seal sewn into Corvath's cuff, the same dark-edged heat now burning in the trial dress. Rhaevan went very still. Elianor whispered Judge Seal. The dress flared around her. Corvath's sleeve burned open without consuming his flesh, exposing a strip of blackened fire silk stitched beneath the robe lining. The trial dress read the source. Judge Seal matched. Trial cloth pre-marked. Execution. Heat supplied before royal ignition. The court understood pre-marked before it understood treason. Corvath's face hardened. Ember trial law allows judicial preparation. Preparation was the word judges used when they wanted the verdict sewn before the question. Elianor looked at the black thread on his sleeve, then at the flame still standing between her and the king. No, she said. It allows you to decide what his fire will become before he touches it. The blue-white dress lifted higher, every seam shining at once. The court finally understood that the trial had not begun when Rhaevan raised his hand. The execution fire had not begun in Rhaevan's hand. It had begun in the judge seal Corvath stitched into the trial cloth before the king touched it. But the judge seal had not entered alone. Corvath Nair did not deny the black thread. He named it preparation. Preparation was safer than guilt. It sounded useful. The words settled over the Emberglass Court with the weight of something rehearsed. The high Ember judge stood with his sleeve still burning blue-white at the cuff, the hidden strip of blackened fire silk exposed beneath his ash robes, and yet his face held no confession, no shame, no panic. Only the cold patience of a man who believed law could survive anything if he named the wound properly. Elianor remained inside the trial dress. The flames still climbed her body without consuming her, lifting the pale fire silk away from her skin in trembling layers. Her arms ached from holding still. Her burned fingers throbbed where she had touched the seam. The dress had read the judge seal, but contested was still not overturned. The fabric had not released her. The court had not declared her innocent. Corvath's law still stood close enough to kill. Some nobles looked at the black thread in Corvath's sleeve as if the trial were already over. Elianor knew better. A single exposed stitch did not undo a whole garment, but it showed where to pull. Corvath raised his unburned hand. Pre-marking is lawful judicial preparation. Lawful, Elianor knew, was often only another word for already approved. Ember trial fabric must be guarded against royal hesitation, emotional interference, and unlawful mercy distortion. A dress prepared for judgment is not corrupted. It is secured. Rhaevan Sol's eyes had not left the black thread. Royal hesitation, he said. Corvath inclined his head. Even kings may hesitate before necessary fire. The words struck the hall cleanly because they did not sound like treason. They sounded like policy, and policy was harder to execute than a traitor. That was how the Emberglass Court had survived beside Rhaevan for years, not by defying the Dragon King openly, but by preparing the heat around him until his flame seemed to choose what the court had already sown. Elianor looked down at the seam glowing across her wrist. The fire trembled there waiting. She pressed her burned fingers to the stitch again, then read who authorized the premarking. Corvath's face sharpened. The accused has no standing to compel authorization record. The dress tightened around Elianor's ribs. For one breath, the blue-white fire turned red at the edges and pain flashed across her skin. Not a burn, a warning. Trial law resisting the question. Her knees almost bent, but she locked them and kept her hand on the seam. A mender did not pull away from a knot because it tightened. She found where the pressure entered. The fire silk answered, Premark authorized. Ember trial seal entered. Royal hesitation anticipated. Execution heat prepared. The dress had named the system. It had not yet named the first hand. The 4 lines burned through the cloth in separate colors. The authorization mark was black-blue. The Ember trial seal was dark red. Royal hesitation burned pale, almost white-thin as breath before it disappeared beneath the prepared execution heat. Rhaevan's expression changed at the 3rd line. Not anger first. Recognition. How long, he asked. Corvath turned to him. Majesty. How long has my hesitation been anticipated? The question made every brazier dim, as if the court's fire had been asked the same thing. Every brazier lowered not out of obedience, but as if the flames themselves were listening from inside their wicks. Corvath did not answer directly. A kingdom cannot pause each time royal fire remembers softness. Mercy has its place after order is secure. After death, Elianor said. His eyes cut to her. After judgment. Rhaevan took one step toward the dais. The trial flame between him and Elianor shifted, not attacking him, not inviting him closer, only marking the distance his own law had made. He stopped before it touched his armor. If my fire has been obeying prepared heat, he said, voice low, then how many deaths wore my name before I chose them? No one answered. That silence was more damning than fear. Corvath's mouth hardened. Your name is the crown. The crown cannot be weakened by every moment of private reluctance. Ember trial law preserves necessary judgment when royal fire wavers. Necessary to whom Elianor asked. The dress flared. For a moment the court saw other seams. Not whole executions, not full deaths, only flashes brief and terrible in their precision. A black thread sewn beneath a prisoner's mantle, a judge seal pressed into a trial veil, a sleeve cuff marked before Rhaevan entered the chamber, a strip of fire silk hidden inside a banner meant to receive ash. Each flash was the same shape, the same dark-edged preparation, the same overstitched heat waiting for royal flame to touch it and become final. Rhaevan stared at the fragments. His face did not cleanse itself. It darkened with responsibility. "I touched them," he said. Corvath seized on that. "Yes. Royal fire completed judgment. And your prepared heat told it what to become. Prepared heat protects the realm from hesitation. My hesitation had a reason. Mercy often does." Corvath's voice softened into something almost sorrowful. "That is why it is dangerous." Elianor understood then why he was more frightening than a cruel man. Corvath did not hate mercy because he did not understand it. He hated it because he understood exactly how often it might interrupt power if allowed to stand as first heat. The dress opened another seam at Elianor's shoulder. Pain ran down her arm, but the cloth did not burn her. It showed the same black stitch repeating through the years, always hidden beneath official fabric, always waiting near places where royal fire had once bent. The fire silk read again. First heat wavered. Prepared execution heat supplied. Royal flame completed. Ash record accepted. Rhaevan looked at Elianor across the flame. For the first time, he seemed afraid not of losing control, but of learning how much control had never been his. Elianor did not comfort him. Her voice came raw through the fire. "A weapon is still responsible for the hand that lets itself be carried." The trial dress burned brighter, not because it forgave him, but because it agreed. Corvath stepped forward. "Enough. The trial has exceeded lawful inquiry." Rhaevan turned on him. "No, it has finally reached it." The next seam opened before Corvath could stop it. Not wide, just enough. The judge seal had not been stitched for Elianor's trial. It had been used in every royal execution where Rhaevan's first fire hesitated. But repeated use was not origin. Every pattern had a first stitch. The dress had shown the pattern. Now it looked for the first stitch. The repeated judge seals faded from the burning fabric one by one, not vanishing, not forgiven, only drawing backward through the seams as if the trial dress were pulling a long black thread through years of royal executions. Around Elianor's shoulders, the blue-white flame tightened. The cloth still held her upright on the black trial dais. It had not released her body. It had not cleared her name. It had only proved that the garment burning around her knew more than the court wanted fabric to know. The court watched the many marks shrink into one narrow seam near the center of her bodice, one beginning, one knot, one place where the thread had first been tied. Elianor's breath came shallowly. The dress did not burn her skin, but it demanded endurance from every part of her. Her hands shook. The old burns on her fingers glowed faintly where the fire silk had recognized her touch. She was not controlling the flame. A mender did not command cloth into truth. She followed pressure until the stitch gave way. Rhaevan stood at the foot of the dais, his face lit by the same fire that had been wearing his name for years. He did not reach for her. He did not command the dress to stop. He had learned enough to fear his own command inside this pattern. Corvath Nyre's sleeve still smoldered where the hidden judge seal had been exposed. He kept his arm lowered, hiding what everyone had already seen. His voice, when it came, was steady. "The pattern has exceeded lawful inquiry." Elianor touched the single burning seam, then read the first stitch. The seam brightened. Corvath stepped forward. "Origin authorization is throne protected. No accused servant may compel it." The fire around Elianor's ribs went red at the edges. Pain struck hard enough to bend her spine. She gripped the dress with both hands but did not pull away. The fabric had found the threshold where servant standing ended and throne authority began. Corvath had known it would. That was why he did not need to panic. The first stitch was not hidden by distance, it was hidden by rank. Rhaevan's eyes turned to the dress. "Read it," he said. The command struck the fire silk. For a moment the whole garment froze. Then the flame recoiled from his voice. Not from fear, from recognition. The command carried the same heat as the pattern it was trying to expose. Royal fire met royal fire. The dress could not fully obey him because his authority was part of the stitch. His voice pressed against the seam like a key made from the same metal as the lock. Corvath's mouth tightened. You see? Majesty. Throne-protected origin cannot be reopened by the same throne without formal emberglass release. Rhaevan's jaw clenched. Convenient. Necessary. Elianor closed her eyes for one breath and felt the seam beneath her fingers. She ignored the crown heat. She ignored the judge heat. She searched like a mender, not a ruler. Patterns did not lie because they were clever. They lied because someone had decided which layer should face outward. She opened her eyes. Patterns do not begin at the crown, she said. They begin where the thread was tied. The dress stilled. Then the fire moved sideways. Not upward toward Rhaevan, not outward toward Corvath. It slipped beneath the visible royal mark and followed the buried tension to its knot. The seam at Elianor's bodice split into 4 burning lines. First stitch entered. Coronation seal applied. Mercy variance restricted. Prepared heat authorized. The Emberglass Court became cold despite all its fire. Rhaevan did not move. The coronation seal burned in the fabric like a wound sealed with gold. Elianor saw the image inside the flame, not Rhaevan as the ruler he was now, but younger, newly crowned, standing bareheaded before the Ember throne, while the succession fires still burned unstable around him. Corvath stood beside the coronation mantle with other Ember officials, their hands arranged over the inner lining. The mantle's thread glowed red gold, then blackened at the seams nearest the young king's throat and wrists. Mercy variance restricted. Prepared heat authorized. No one spoke. Then, Rhaevan did. If the first stitch bears my seal, he said slowly, then I did not only obey the system, I inherited it and let it keep speaking. Elianor looked at him through the flames. He had not chosen the first stitch as a boy king surrounded by officials and succession fire, but he had worn the mantle. He had ruled through it. He had let prepared heat answer for him whenever his first fire hesitated. The knowledge did not make him innocent. It made his guilt older than intent. Corvath lifted his chin. The crown required consistency after the succession fires. Your bloodline had just taken the throne. The noble houses feared weakness. The border courts watched for fracture. Mercy variance could have made your reign unstable before it began. Elianor's burned fingers pressed harder into the seam. Necessary for whom, the question passed through the trial dress before Corvath could answer. The fire burned toward the coronation mark, not consuming but exposing. Gold thread peeled back in light. Beneath the mark of Rhaevan's crown lay another layer. Judge, heat council, witness, succession, authority, all braided into one first stitch and made to look like royal will. Rhaevan stared at it as if seeing the inside of his own reign for the first time. Corvath's voice sharpened. Do not confuse structure with betrayal. A crown must survive its first mercy. The dress pulled tight around Elianor's throat. She could barely breathe, but she kept her fingers on the seam. The first stitch opened one final line in blue-white flame. The first stitch did not bear Corvath's seal alone. It bore the coronation mark placed on Rhaevan's fire before he ever sat fully on the Ember throne. The coronation mark did not fade after the dress named it. It tightened. Gold fire drew inward across Elianor's bodice, pulling the blue-white seam into a narrow circle over her heart. The trial dress still did not burn her flesh, but now it held her more cruelly than flame could have. The cloth had found something older than Corvath's sleeve, older than the repeated judge seals, older than the courier's overstitched execution heat. It had found the mark placed on the king before the kingdom allowed him to become one. Rhaevan stood at the foot of the dais watching the coronation fire turn through the weave. His face had gone terribly still. Not empty. Never empty. The Dragon King's stillness was a wall built around things that could split stone if released. Elianor did not mistake his pain for absolution. He had worn the mark for years. Whether he had known its first knot or not, his fire had answered through it. Prisoners had burned beneath his name. Trial banners had carried ash in his authority. Servants like her had been taught to fear the king's flame while the court prepared the heat before he raised a hand. Corvath Nair watched the same mark with a different expression. Possession. The coronation mark is not evidence of corruption, he said. It is the proof of lawful continuity. Elianor's breathing hurt. Continuity for prepared heat. For the crown. For the judges who stood close enough to stitch it. Corvath's gaze hardened. A servant mender does not interpret coronation fabric. The dress burned brighter. Not with agreement. With pressure. Elianor understood that pressure now. Fire silk did not shout. It tightened around the place where someone had forced one meaning over another. Rhaevan's voice came low. What did the mark allow? Corvath turned sharply. Majesty coronation rights are throne protected. The mark is on my fire. The mark preserved your fire. Elianor felt the seam under her fingers pulse. Preserved. The same kind of useful word as preparation. She pressed her burned fingertips against the gold circle, then read what it preserved. The dress resisted. The gold mark flared red at its edge, and pain shot across Elianor's ribs. Her knees nearly buckled. Rhaevan moved toward her, but the blue-white flame rose between them, not attacking, only warning. If he touched the cloth with force, his crown heat might press the mark deeper instead of freeing her. He stopped. The stop cost him. Elianor saw that. It did not heal anything, but it mattered that he was learning restraint too late instead of force too fast. Corvath seized the silence. You see the danger. The trial dress rejects unlawful inquiry. Coronation heat cannot be opened by accused hands. Elianor swallowed through pain. Not opened. She found the seam where the coronation gold crossed the black judge heat. Unpicked. The word moved through the fabric like a needle. The dress answered. Succession fire unstable. Ember judge custody granted. Royal mercy variance. Restricted. Prepared heat permitted upon hesitation. The court shifted. Not enough to revolt. Enough to understand the mark was not ceremonial. Rhaevan read the lines in the fire, each one cutting through the story he had been given about his own reign. Custody, he said. Corvath inclined his head. Temporary guidance during succession. Instability. For how long? Until the crown proved consistent. Rhaevan's eyes lifted slowly. And who judged consistency? Corvath did not answer at once. He did not need to. The dress did. Ember judge custody retained. Royal hesitation monitored. Prepared heat renewed by trial record. The blue-white flames around Elianor's sleeves trembled. She understood the shape of it before the court did. The coronation mark had not been a single chain. It had been a system that renewed itself every time Rhaevan's fire hesitated and the judges supplied prepared heat. Each execution did not merely kill. It proved the court still needed custody over the king's mercy. Rhaevan's hands curled at his sides. You used every hesitation as reason to keep the stitch. Corvath's voice sharpened. Because hesitation kept returning. Because mercy kept returning. Because weakness kept threatening judgment. Elianor looked up at him through the burning veil of her dress. You keep changing its name because the first one still frightens you. Corvath stepped closer to the dais. Mercy, without order, is collapse. Order without mercy is cloth over a wound. The dress flared. For one moment, the gold coronation mark thinned enough to reveal another seam beneath it. Not Corvath's full record, not every judgment. One first renewal, one moment when the temporary mark became something lasting. Rhaevan saw it. So read that, he said. This time he did not command. He asked the fabric. Elianor felt the difference. So did the flame. The dress opened the lower seam. First renewal entered. Royal hesitation observed. Prepared heat used. Custody extended. A vision formed in the fire. Rhaevan, young and newly crowned, standing in the Emberglass Court months after coronation. A prisoner knelt before him. Not the courier, not the same case, not the whole bloody history. One prisoner. An old border woman with silver hair braided down her back, hands bound, chin lifted. Rhaevan's flame hovered near her chest, but it did not strike. The younger king said, She surrendered the gate before the soldiers entered. Corvath's younger voice answered from the side, and by surrendering late she preserved enemy names. Rhaevan's fire dimmed. Then the prepared heat moved from the coronation mark. Red gold flame passed over his hesitation and struck through the woman's trial veil. The vision ended before death. The dress did not need to show more. Rhaevan closed his eyes. Elianor did not look away from him. Corvath said that execution secured the southern houses. Your reign stabilized after that day. Rhaevan opened his eyes. My reign stabilized because my mercy was used against itself. No, Corvath said. Your reign stabilized because your fire finally obeyed. The coronation mark burned darker. The dress read one final line. The first time prepared heat renewed the coronation stitch. Rhaevan's fire had hesitated over a surrendered woman, and the court used that hesitation to keep custody of his mercy. The first renewal left the court quieter than accusation ever could. Elianor stood inside the burning trial dress while the image of the surrendered woman faded from the fire silk. The cloth still held the shape of her pain without showing death. It did not need to show bodies to make the room understand sequence. First mercy, prepared heat, custody extended, a reign stabilized by teaching royal fire that hesitation would be corrected. Rhaevan did not move. For once, the Dragon King looked less like a weapon and more like the man standing too close to the forge that had shaped him. Corvath Nair recovered first, because he always did. The renewal was lawful. Elianor almost laughed, but the dress tightened before the sound could leave her throat. Lawful. The word had become so familiar in the Emberglass Court that no one seemed to notice how often it arrived wearing smoke. Rhaevan opened his eyes. You kept custody of my mercy through execution records. We kept custody of unstable succession fire, Corvath replied. A young king's hesitation can invite civil fracture. Ember Judge custody ensured that your flame remained consistent until the realm believed in you. Believed in me, Rhaevan said. The words were quiet, more dangerous than a shout. Elianor looked at the gold mark over her heart, the black judge thread beneath it, and the blue-white mercy still trying to burn through both. A pattern did not survive because one thread was strong. It survived because every crossing held the next in place. She touched the seam again. Pain answered before fire did. Her knees weakened. The trial dress had been burning for too long. Not consuming her, no, but endurance could be another kind of wound. Every thread held heat near her skin. Every revealed layer asked her body to stand as proof. Rhaevan saw the tremor. He took one step closer, then stopped himself before the flame warned him. The restraint showed on his face like a blade held by the edge. Elianor, he said. Not flame tempter, not servant, her name. She did not let it soften her. If this dress was made to test lies, she said, why does it know coronation custody? The question moved through the fabric. Corvath's face sharpened. That was answer enough. Elianor pressed harder into the seam. Read the dress purpose. The trial dress flared red at the hem. Corvath's silver hook lowered a fraction. Trial purpose is already declared. The accused lies, the cloth burns. The accused speaks truth. The cloth passes judgment. No, Elianor said. That is what the court tells the accused. The fire silk tightened around her wrists like cuffs made of light. She kept her hand on the seam. A mender asks what the garment was made to hold. The blue-white flame changed. It stopped climbing and began folding inward seam by seam, as if the dress were turning itself inside out without moving from her body. Beneath the visible fire silk lay another weave thin black loops hidden between the pale threads, too fine for noble eyes, too precise to be accidental. The dress read, Trial function declared. Lie burning announced. Hidden function retained. Royal fire memory capture enabled. The court stirred. Corvath spoke at once. All trial garments preserve heat for record. The dress answered beneath him. Accused body used as ignition field. Royal fire contact required. Accidental mercy recollection trapped. False heat preserved for judgment. Elianor's breath stopped. Not because she did not understand, because she did. The dress had not been made only to burn a liar. It had been made to catch whatever Rhaevan's fire accidentally remembered when it touched the accused. If his first heat hesitated, if mercy rose, if a forgotten command tried to speak through flame, the dress trapped it in the weave, overstitched it with execution heat, and preserved the corrected version as law. The accused did not only stand trial, the accused became the loom. Rhaevan's face went pale beneath the firelight. You used condemned bodies to correct my fire. Corvath's voice hardened. We use trial fabric to preserve judgment from royal instability. Say it plainly, Elianor whispered. The dress burned brighter. Corvath did not. So the cloth did. Flame fabric correction active. Mercy recollection captured. Execution heat restored. Ash record produced. Rhaevan turned his head slowly toward Corvath. How many times? Corvath's answer came smooth and cold. As often as necessary. The court heard it. Even Corvath seemed to realize the words had stepped too close to nakedness. He lifted his chin. A realm survives because necessary things are done before weaker hearts understand them. Elianor looked down at the hidden weave. Her own trial dress had been made for the same purpose. Not simply to test whether she had seduced royal fire, to trap the truth. If Rhaevan's fire remembered mercy again when it touched her, the flame had not spared her by miracle. The dress had failed because she understood seams. The thought moved through her hands. The fire silk answered. Mender contact persistent. Seam pressure identified. Hidden function exposed. Witness category pending. Corvath's eyes narrowed. Stop the reading. Rhaevan did not look away from the dress. The words struck the hall with clean force. Elianor felt the seam over her heart loosen. Not open, loosen. Corvath saw it too. For the first time he moved toward her without the hook, one hand lifted as if he meant to press the fabric closed himself. Rhaevan stepped between them. The trial flame rose in warning not at Corvath alone but at both men. It would not allow force from either side. Elianor remained inside the dress because the dress had not finished naming what it was. She looked at the hidden black loops. Read what I am to it. The dress went still. The court held its breath. Then blue-white fire ran from her burned fingertips to every seam in the trial. Dress, not as crown flame, not as judge heat, but as recognition of labor hands that had mended royal firecloth hands, that knew where heat bent, hands that found stitches the court had hidden under beauty. The fire silk read one final line. Flame fabric witness detected. Corvath went white. But the dress did not release her. Instead, it tightened around the hidden weave and opened the next layer. The trial dress had not been made to find Elianor's lie. It had been made to trap whatever truth Rhaevan's fire accidentally remembered when he burned her. The court did not fear Elianor's survival until the dress gave her a name, Flame Fabric Witness. The words burned through the pale fire silk and reflected across the glass fire ceiling, turning every polished pane blue-white. Nobles who had watched her trial with appetite now watched the hem of her dress as if it might crawl toward them and read what their own sleeves had touched. The Ember scribes wrote nothing. No one wanted to be the first to record that a servant's labor had become standing. Elianor remained trapped inside the burning dress. Recognition was not freedom. The cloth still held her at the throat, wrists, ribs, and heart. It had stopped trying to consume her, but it had not stopped using her body as the place where hidden heat could speak. Every seam pressed into her skin with a demand. She was named witness, but the law had not yet decided whether a witness could survive the testimony. Corvath Nair understood that before the others. She is not a witness, he said. She is an ignition anomaly produced by prolonged exposure to corrupted trial cloth. Elianor looked at him through the blue-white flame. You keep calling the cloth corrupted whenever it remembers what you put in it. The dress brightened at the word remembers, then darkened at the seam beneath her collarbone. Rhaevan noticed. So did Corvath. A hidden function had been exposed. But the dress had not shown the truth it had been built to trap when Rhaevan touched her. That truth still sat somewhere deeper in the weave, under the first mercy, under the execution, heat, under coronation custody, under the system of prepared judgment. Corvath stepped closer to the dais. The trial is concluded. The accused has triggered forbidden witness classification. She must be removed from public record and placed under Emberglass custody. Custody, Rhaevan said. The word came like a warning dragged across stone. Corvath bowed his head slightly. For the safety of the realm, Elianor almost smiled. Every dangerous word in Ardenthal dressed itself for safety. She pressed her burned fingers to the dark seam near her collarbone. The fabric pulsed under her touch. Not like a heartbeat, like a knot resisting a needle. What truth were you made to trap from this fire, she whispered. The dress did not answer. Pain answered first. Blue-white flame turned red along her ribs and Elianor's knees buckled. She caught herself before falling, but the court saw the weakness. Corvath saw it most clearly. There, he said. The body fails. Witness category cannot sustain royal fire memory. Remove her. 2 guards started toward the dais. Rhaevan did not roar. He lifted one hand. The guards stopped. That restraint was more frightening than flame. A command too loud might force the dress deeper into old obedience. A command too soft might let Corvath take her. Rhaevan stood between those dangers, learning too late that kings who had relied on force did not always know how to protect without it. Elianor, he said, quieter, now can it read without killing you? She breathed through the tightening seam. That depends. On what her eyes met his through the fire. On whether you need it to spare you. The words hit him visibly. Good. She needed him wounded by truth, not comforted by it. Rhaevan lowered his hand. Read it then. Not to spare me. Corvath's voice cut in. Majesty, you cannot authorize a servant witness to interrogate royal fire memory. I am not authorizing her, Rhaevan said. She already has standing. Standing granted by corrupted fabric. Standing revealed by fabric you prepared. The court shifted at that. Elianor felt the seam loosen only a little. A mender learned to take little. She slid her fingers beneath the burning edge of the collar seam. The dress did not tear. It opened enough for a thread of white-blue flame to escape. The thread rose into the air and stretched toward Rhaevan's hand, the same hand that had ignited her trial dress. Then the fire silk read, Current trial ignition entered. Royal fire contact made. Hidden recollection triggered. Capture function activated. Truth targeted for containment. Elianor's breath caught. Rhaevan's face hardened. What truth? The seam tightened again before the next line could form. Corvath moved quickly, too quickly for dignity. He snapped his fingers toward the ember scribes. Strike that sequence from the draft record. Current trial instability is inadmissible. No scribe moved. Not because they were brave, because the dress had turned toward them. A single flame thread crawled across the air, not touching the record table, but hovering above the blank page where Elianor's guilt should have been written. The flame did not write words. It showed heat. Rhaevan's fire from 3 nights earlier. The border courier alive for 7 heartbeats longer than allowed. Elianor kneeling near the throne steps one loose thread from the singed firecloth brushing royal flame. Then something the court had not seen. The courier's red wrist cord falling against the firecloth, a tiny strand of message silk hidden inside the cord catching Rhaevan's spared flame. Elianor's hand closing around the scorched cloth later in the west fabric room, not knowing she held a thread touched by mercy and message together. The dress read, Courier message, silk retained, royal mercy touched message, mender contact preserved seam, accusation triggered to recover cloth. Elianor went cold beneath the fire. The trial had not begun because she had seduced royal flame. It had begun because she had accidentally preserved something Corvath wanted back. Rhaevan turned toward Corvath slowly. What message Corvath's expression did not change, but the black thread at his sleeve sparked. The courier was condemned as an enemy carrier. His message was ash by lawful sentence. Elianor looked at the flame thread above the record table. No, she said. It was stitched into the cord. The dress answered her. Message not ash. Message transferred. West fabric room contact confirmed. Flame fabric witness retained. The court finally understood why she had been dressed for burning. Not to test whether she lied, to destroy the mender who had touched the remaining seam. Corvath lifted his silver hook again, this time toward the flame thread above the scribes. Rhaevan stepped once, and the whole hall stopped breathing. But Elianor spoke before either man could act. Read the message, silk. The trial dress flared so violently that the blue-white fire reached the ceiling. The hidden thread inside the flame opened one line. The border courier had not carried enemy names beneath his tongue. He had carried the list of executions where Rhaevan's first fire had tried to spare the condemned. The court tried to become loud before the list could become law. A dozen voices rose at once beneath the glass fire ceiling, not in outrage for the dead but in fear of sequence. Nobles demanded the message. Be declared enemy forgery. Ember scribes whispered over blank pages. Guards shifted at the edge of the dais, uncertain whether to protect the king from the truth or protect the truth from the judges. Elianor remained inside the burning dress. The blue-white flame had climbed to the collar again, bright enough to make every tear in her eyes look like molten glass. The fire did not consume her, but it was taking strength from her body with every seam it opened. Witness standing was not safety. It was permission for pain to matter. The flame thread above the record table still held the message silk line. Rhaevan's first fire had tried to spare the condemned. Corvath Nair struck his silver hook against the black floor. The courier carried treason. Lists can be forged. Enemy houses often invent mercy claims to weaken royal confidence after punishment. Elianor's fingers tightened against the dress. He did not deny the list. He named it enemy work. Another clean word laid over a dirty seam. Rhaevan looked at Corvath without blinking. If the list was forged, why did you need her burned before it could be read? The question entered the hall like a blade with no ornament. Corvath's mouth hardened. Because corrupted cloth cannot become court record. The trial dress answered at Elianor's throat. Message silk retained. Court record avoided. Accused body selected as recovery fire. Mender removal required. Elianor felt the words pass through the weave and into her bones. Mender removal. Not trial. Not justice. Removal. Her body had been dressed in fire because her hands had carried a seam the court had failed to reclaim. Rhaevan stepped closer to the dais. Read the first name. Corvath turned sharply. Majesty, do not allow enemy lists to reopen sealed executions. Rhaevan's voice lowered. I said read it. The dress did not obey him. The blue-white flames shuddered, then tightened around Elianor instead. Pain tore across her shoulders as the garment resisted royal command. The hidden pattern still knew his fire as part of the system that had sealed executions. His command pushed against the list, but the dress could not tell whether he meant to expose it or wear it again. Elianor gasped. Rhaevan stopped at once. The halt was immediate. Not because he was innocent. Because he finally understood that even his attempt to help could become heat against her. Elianor lifted a trembling hand toward the message silk. Not by command, she whispered. Her voice scraped, but the dress carried it. By thread. The flame thread bent toward her. She did not ask the list to accuse. She asked it where it was tied. The message silk opened. First name retained. Execution South Ash Gate. Condemned Rhaevan thrice-bound. First fire withdrew. Prepared heat supplied. Ash record accepted. A brief image formed in the fabric across Elianor's sleeve. An old soldier kneeling with 3 iron cords around his wrists. His head bowed, not in surrender but in exhaustion. Rhaevan stood before him, younger than now, flame gathered in his palm. The fire leaned close, then pulled back. The old soldier spoke only one sentence before the image blurred. I opened the gate for your wounded. The prepared heat came from the side. The sleeve went red-gold. The vision ended before Ash. Rhaevan's face had gone still in the way stone goes still before cracking. I remember him, he said. Corvath answered too quickly. A traitor who opened a military gate without crown order. Rhaevan did not look away from the sleeve. He opened it for my wounded. And let enemy scouts mark the road. My first fire withdrew. Your final fire completed judgment. Elianor could barely stand. Final fire was prepared. Corvath's gaze snapped to her. You are alive because the court permits the dress to hold its burn. Do not mistake endurance for authority. The dress burned brighter at the word authority. Then it read another line. Flame fabric witness standing active. Message silk sequence admissible through seam contact. Corvath's face tightened. That was the first time Elianor saw him fear her standing more than her survival. The list had not chosen her. The fire had not crowned her. Her hands had simply touched too many forced seams for the dress to keep pretending she was only a body inside judgment. Rhaevan looked at the message, silk. How many names? The fire did not answer, with a number. It opened the thread just enough for the court to see that the list continued beyond the first name. Not all of it. Not the whole history. Only a row of small knots, each one tied where first fire had withdrawn and prepared heat had followed. Corvath lifted his silver hook again, slower this time. Rhaevan saw him. Elianor saw him too. But the hook was not aimed at the dress now, it was aimed at the message silk. "He wants to cut the list," she said. Corvath moved. The hook flashed. This time Rhaevan did not roar. He stepped between the hook and the flame thread with his bare hand open. The silver caught his palm instead of the silk. Blood fell onto the black floor. The trial dress flared blue-white. Crown blood entered seam path. Royal injury recorded. Message silk preserved. Rhaevan did not look at his bleeding hand. He looked at Elianor. Read what the list was meant to reach. The flame thread trembled. Elianor followed it with her burned fingers past the first name, past the small knots, past the prepared heat marks to the final fold hidden inside the courier's red cord. The message silk opened one more line. The border courier was not carrying the list to an enemy house. He was carrying it to the Dragon King before the next trial dress could be prepared. For the first time, the message silk did not point backward. It pointed toward Elianor. The thin red thread hovered above the record table, trembling between Rhaevan's bleeding palm and the burning trial dress wrapped around her body. The list had shown one name. It had shown prepared heat. It had shown that the courier had not carried treason to an enemy house, but warning toward the Dragon King himself. Before the next trial dress could be prepared. The court understood next before it understood guilt. Next meant this dress, this trial, this public burning. Elianor felt the fabric tighten along her waist, as if the garment resented being named before it finished its work. The blue-white flames did not consume her, but every seam now pulled toward the message, silk hungry and defensive at once. Her strength had thinned badly. Her legs shook beneath the weight of standing. The dress had made her a witness, but it still held her like evidence that could be destroyed if the wrong heat won. Corvath Nair lowered his silver hook, its tip stained with Rhaevan's blood. He did not look defeated. That frightened Elianor more than anger. "The courier's intended recipient is irrelevant," he said. "A warning not received by the crown has no standing. A list intercepted before royal review remains unverified enemy material." Rhaevan's bleeding hand closed slowly. "It was meant for me. It did not reach you. Because someone stopped it. Because judgment intervened," Corvath said. As it must when enemy-carried fabric attempts to unsettle execution law, Elianor tasted smoke in her mouth. Enemy-carried fabric, not message, not warning, fabrik. He was trying to make the list small enough to cut. She lifted her burned fingers toward the red thread, then read why it never reached him. The trial dress flared. Pain ran through her ribs so sharply that her vision dimmed. The garment resisted the question because the question touched its own purpose. It was no longer merely reading old executions. It was reading the reason Elianor had been dressed in fire. Rhaevan stepped forward but stopped before the flame warned him. That restraint had become its own kind of confession. He had spent years believing power meant ending distance. Now he was learning that stepping too quickly toward harm could deepen it. The fire silk answered in 4 burning lines. Courier intercepted. Message silk retained. Next dress commissioned. Mender contact anticipated. Elianor nearly lost her balance. Mender contact anticipated. The words struck harder than flame. Her trial had not been a panicked reaction after the fire softened near her. It had been prepared before she knew she held anything dangerous. Before the loose thread brushed Rhaevan's flame, before Corvath accused her of seducing royal fire, they had expected the message silk to find a mender. Or they had expected only a mender to preserve it long enough to be useful. Rhaevan read the line too. You knew she would touch it. Corvath's gaze remained fixed on the dress, not the king. Firecloth passes through servant hands. That is why servant hands require discipline. Elianor looked at him. No. That is why you chose cloth. The dress burned brighter. The seam agreed before the court did. Corvath's expression tightened. Rhaevan's voice dropped. Read who commissioned the next dress. Corvath turned sharply. Majesty commissioning records for trial garments are sealed under Ember trial privilege. Everything cruel in this hall seems to be sealed, because unsealed fear destroys order. Elianor pressed her fingers against the seam near her heart. Patterns do not hide at the seal. They hide where payment begins. The fire silk stilled. Then the trial dress turned inward again, following the heat beneath the visible embroidery to the place where cloth had first been requested. Not every trial dress, not the whole system. This one. Her dress. The garment burning on her body opened a narrow image, a work table in the upper fire silk room, not the west fabric room where Elianor worked. Pale cloth laid flat, black thread measured beside blue-white silk, Corvath's hand resting near the pattern board, a scribe marking the order before Elianor had been named in court. The dress read, "Trial dress commissioned. Recovery fire required. Message silk expected. Accused mender selected, if contact confirmed." The court shifted. Accused selected. Not discovered. Selected. Elianor felt the words move through every cruel name they had given her. Flame tempter, fabric rat, ash-fingered, seducer of royal fire. They had all been stitched over something simpler. She had been useful to the trap. Rhaevan's face hardened. "You chose her before the accusation." Corvath did not deny it. "We identified a likely carrier of corrupted fabric. A servant you could burn without troubling the court. A servant whose contact with royal fire had already proven unstable." Elianor's voice came out thin but clear. "My hands were not unstable. They were trained." The dress brightened. At trained. Not chosen. Not blessed. Trained. Years of scorched linens, torn banners, armor sleeves, trial hems. Every burn on her fingers had taught her where fire was forced to bend. Rhaevan looked at those fingers through the flames. Then his eyes lifted to hers. "I let them call your skill corruption." Elianor did not answer. Silence was not forgiveness. The message silk pulled toward the dress, and one final fold opened near the hem, where the prepared execution heat had been thickest. It showed not a full future-only intent. Elianor's body turned to ash. The message silk recovered clean from the remains. Rhaevan's accidental mercy trapped in the cloth. Corvath's trial record declaring royal fire, purified. Rhaevan saw it. The court saw it. Corvath lifted his chin. "The realm cannot survive if every servant hand becomes a court of flame." Elianor looked at him from inside the dress meant to erase her. "No," she said. "It cannot survive if only judges are allowed to sow truth." The trial dress opened its last line for the night. Elianor's trial dress had not been made because she seduced royal fire. It had been made because her hands were the only place the message silk and Rhaevan's mercy could meet before Corvath burned them both. The trial dress had almost finished doing what it had been made to do. Not burn Elianor. Erase the meeting place. The blue-white flames bent inward around her body, drawing the message silk, the prepared execution heat, and the king's trapped mercy toward one final seam over her heart. If the dress closed that seam, the court would not need to deny what had happened. It would only need to name her ash as purified evidence and sew the corrected record into law. Corvath Nair understood that better than anyone. "Complete the trial," he said. The words were not shouted. They did not need to be. They carried the old confidence of a man who had watched fabric obey him for years. The hem of Elianor's dress turned red gold. Rhaevan stepped forward. Elianor lifted one hand before he could speak. No command. His jaw tightened. The court saw the struggle in him. So did she. A dragon king who had been shaped into a weapon wanted to break the thing hurting her. But this dress had been built to use his force against itself. If he roared, if he burned, if he seized the fabric with power alone, prepared heat would take his command and wear it. Again, Elianor pressed her shaking fingers to the seam over her heart. "A mender does not tear a trap apart," she whispered. "She finds the closing stitch." The dress shuddered. The message silk trembled above the record table, still stretched between Rhaevan's blood and the burning garment. Corvath's eyes narrowed. Servant hands cannot complete ember trial law. Elianor looked at him through the fire. No, they complete what judges leave crooked. The seam opened, not wide, just enough for one black thread to show. Recovery fire entered. Witness body marked for ash. Message silk retrieval pending. Royal mercy capture pending. Corrected trial record prepared. A low sound moved through the court. Rhaevan read every line. His face did not soften. It sharpened into something colder than rage. You were going to use her death to recover the message. Corvath's answer came immediately. The court was going to preserve lawful fire from corruption, and my mercy contained. And her body, Corvath did not look at Elianor, necessary. The trial dress flared at the word. Necessary had been stitched too many times into too many deaths. Rhaevan turned toward the court, toward the nobles. The ember scribes, the guards, the silent judges who had watched servant bodies become fabric law. If this trial completes, he said, my fire will be used again. Corvath lifted his chin. Your fire is the crown, no, Rhaevan said. My fire has been made costume for judgment. Then he did something Elianor did not expect. He removed the black dragon gauntlet from his right hand and laid it on the floor. The court stiffened. A king's gauntlet was not armor alone. It was execution privilege, battle authority, royal heat made visible. Without it, his hand looked human, scarred at the knuckles, burned in old places. No song had ever mentioned. He held his bare palm toward Elianor. Not touching. Waiting. What does the closing stitch need? He asked. Elianor understood the cost of yen stitch. He was not asking how to save her quickly. He was asking what the fabric required, even if the answer wounded him. She followed the black thread with her fingers. First heat, she said. Not execution heat. Not prepared heat. The heat before the court dressed it. Corvath stepped forward. Majesty, do not expose unsealed first heat before public court. Every fire judgment under your reign will become contestable. Rhaevan looked at him. Good. The word broke something small and old in the hall. He placed his bare hand into the edge of the blue-white flame. The dress tried to turn his fire red-gold. Elianor felt the prepared heat rise hungrily, eager to seize the king's touch and become law again. She caught the closing stitch with both burned hands and pulled not hard, not violently, but exactly where the pressure had been tied. The fire changed. Under the red-gold heat beneath the black judge seal, under the coronation mark and recovery function, a pale blue flame emerged. Thin, unsteady, still alive. First heat. The dress read. First heat entered. Prepared heat resisted. Flame fabric witness holding seam. Royal mercy uncaptured. Trial record unresolved. Corvath moved for the silver hook. Rhaevan's left hand caught his wrist before the hook reached the cloth. Not with fire. With strength. You will not cut another witness. Corvath's face went white with fury. Without final trial record, the court cannot convict her. Rhaevan looked at Elianor. Then it will not. The first heat spread through the dress. It did not burn outward. It unstitched. The red-gold execution heat peeled away from the mercy thread. The black judge seal loosened from the fire silk. The coronation mark did not vanish, but it opened exposed as part of the pattern, rather than hidden as divine law. The message silk fell gently into Elianor's hands. The trial dress finally stopped tightening. Flame fabric witness confirmed. Accusation false. Recovery fire failed. Message silk preserved. Prepared execution heat suspended pending inquiry. The flames lowered from Elianor's throat. For the first time since the trial began, she breathed without cloth, pulling judgment against her skin. The court did not cheer. That was better. Cheers could turn suffering into spectacle. Silence meant they understood the floor beneath them had changed. Rhaevan released Corvath's wrist. The High Ember Judge did not confess. He did not beg. He only stared at the open dress as if a kingdom had betrayed him by becoming readable. Rhaevan spoke to the guards. Take him from the trial dais. Preserve his sleeve, his hook, every trial garment prepared under his seal, and every ash record made after royal hesitation. Corvath's voice turned sharp. You will unmake your own reign. Rhaevan looked at the exposed coronation mark still glowing in Elianor's dress. No, I will make it answer. The guards took Corvath away. Elianor remained standing because she refused to collapse before the court that had dressed her for burning. But when the last flame loosened, her knees nearly failed. Rhaevan stepped forward, then stopped. He did not touch her. After everything, even that restraint was an apology. He had not earned the right to speak. Elianor looked at his bare hand, then at the message silk in hers. "You burned the dress," she said. "Yes. You let them put me inside it." "Yes. You do not get mercy because yours was hidden first." His voice was quiet. "No." The answer settled between them, painful and clean. Elianor lowered her eyes to the open seam over her heart. The dress was no longer a trial garment. It was evidence. It was witness. It was cloth that had failed to erase the woman wearing it. Rhaevan bowed his head before her, not as a lover, not as a king claiming devotion, but as a man standing before the person his law had almost consumed. "Elianor Vey," he said, "flame fabric witness of Ardenthal. Your hands will decide which seams are red." Her burned fingers closed around the message silk. This time no one called them ash-fingered. Above the Emberglass Court, the braziers changed from red gold to blue-white one by one. Not all records opened, not all wrongs healed. But in the West Fabric Room in the trial, vaults in the banners sewn with old ash, the first threads began to loosen. And beside the Dragon King's throne, the trial dress kept one final seam open, not to accuse Elianor, but to remember where royal fire had first tried to become mercy.